All right, without further ado, let's move on to Substance Designer. So if you click on File, New Substance, it will bring up this new substance graph. So it's called a graph, the actual project or whatever it is that you're working on. And you have certain graph templates. So we're looking for, in this case, physically based metallic roughness. So it's like the first option, it should be. We're going to say these are identifiers, these are labels, these are the usages for it. Same maps that we've been using. In this case, I'm going to set it to 2048 by 2048 for now, just so I have as much resolution as possible. Designer's weird that it can scale, but kind of, and it's, yeah. I usually just work higher, and then I'll scale it down later if I need to. So I'll call this, we're going to make a kind of a rusted corrugated metal, so I'll say rusted metal. And once you're ready, you hit OK. Yep. All right. So everybody's got their project up and ready to work, right? All right. So looking at our various windows here, we have our project or graph explorer, so we can see that I already have a another substance I've already started on previously, a different graph, and then I have this one that I'm also working on. So this is the rusted metal demo that I'm going to make with you guys. Here we have our library, so you may be looking around and seeing a lot of math and are scared. It's fine, don't worry. There's only as much math as we want there to be for designing this stuff. I can show you really complicated graph nodes and very simple ones in comparison. We have our actual graph view. This is our work area. This is where we will actually be creating or plugging in different nodes to our different output channels. So we have one for our color, our metal, our roughness, and our normal map. Here we have our 3D view, which works like most other 3D views. Rotate around, you can see it, any changes done in real time usually. And here we have our 2D view. So any node that we have selected or double click on, we'll be able to see a 2D representation of that. And here on the right will be where we change parameters of any node we have selected. So pretty simple setup for the entire workflow. And along the top here, you have kind of shortcut keys for some of your more commonly used nodes. So that's what, like, B and P is for bump or bitmap. Stuff like grayscale is grayscale. HSL, hue saturation levels, or levels adjustment, normal map, all of those different things. To give you an idea of what this might look like by the end of it, this is what we're trying to achieve today. So we're going to create this sort of corrugated metal with this pattern on it with a bit of rust happening procedurally on it. And this is how our graph network will end up looking like. So here I have my base color, which has nodes put in to kind of blend together. So kind of a generic metal color with a rust blended over to create my base color. We have a pattern that's adjusted with the levels, converted into a normal map, further adjusted with levels, and then plugged into the normal output. We have that normal map being converted using the curvature. You guys remember what curvature is based on yesterday's lecture. It is a map that finds the edges along kind of extruded out geometry, or in this case, normal map information. That's further adjusted with the levels, blended together with another kind of direction, black and white spot pattern with a directional warp on it, blended into this node here, and that creates another levels adjustment that we then plug into our metallic. So we're using a lot of these as a source, as a point of origin. So some of these nodes may have multiple strings coming out of a single node because we're using it in multiple channels or in multiple ways. So I don't have to repeat, like duplicate another group or another node. I can just use the same one and use that as data for another node. And again, grunge maps blending together create a roughness map here. And then kind of normal to height adjusted here. So going back to our previous project, here we go. I have a blank scene, and just to create a simple metal, let's just go ahead and create those nodes. So as I'm working, I can right click and add a node. So I'm just going to create a simple color to start off with. A uniform color is the name of the node. So if you go all the way down, you should see one that's red called uniform color. So you create that, and it creates exactly what it is, a uniform color. Notice in your base parameters, you can actually change your output color here. So let's change it to something like a medium gray. The little next to the color band on the right, they have a little swatch right here. You can also do an eyedropper if you want to, but
how do I actually pull that node?
oh, if you right click, add node, uniform color.
Oh.
Yeah. So once you create that, you can actually plug in that yellow output to the node, or the connecting node for the base color. And notice that it is now adjusted in your 3D view. Alright. So next we need to plug in the normal map. And we're just going to go like one output at a time, and then we'll kind of complicate it and make more spaghetti as we're working along, right? So right click, add node, and then we create a base normal. So a normal node is just the normal color, so that weird kind of bluish purple. It's just a blank normal map. And then we just go ahead and connect it to our normal. Our roughness. So our roughness for now, we're just going to use our just a uniform color for right now. So if I plug it in, its roughness is currently black, which means that it is not rough. So if I want to adjust that, bless you, if I want to make adjustments to that, what I can do is, instead of having this connected, to get rid of a connection, I want to add in like a levels adjustment in between those. I want to sandwich a node in between those. So what I can do is get rid of this node first. I'm going to hold down Control, or actually I can just, no, I apologize. Control's used in Unreal. You just select the node, highlight the node, bless you, and then delete that string in between to delete a connection. So if I wanted to adjust the overall levels of this, I can add a levels node. So right click, add levels. So it needs something to actually plug in, or something plugged into the input of this levels node. So I'm going to plug in the output from my uniform color into the input of this levels node, and then plug in the output to the roughness node. So it should look something like this. And your levels adjustment works just like in Photoshop, your overall histogram. So I can lighten it or darken it based on certain values. Now, right now it's just a pure black color, so it's actually going to have trouble with these top controllers here, so you may want to adjust it down here. There we go. I'm trying to do it looking at the other thing. There we go. There we go. So I can get a look similar to this. And then metallic. In this case, I'm just going to add a uniform color, set to black, and plug in the metallic. Beautiful. We're all done, right? Yeah. No. So what we need to do is we need to actually add in nodes to help control the overall look of this, because we know that we want a certain look. We want kind of a... Oh, let me zoom in for you guys. Again, it'll look like this weird like detective film with all the pins and string attaching to everything. But what we need to do is kind of add in between all those nodes ways to change the overall output node. So we're going from one end to the other. We have to come back to these output nodes. So first of all, the thing I'd like to think about is like one of the main patterns. Okay, so one of the main patterns that we're going to be using is the actual corrugated metal, right? That little diamond or whatever shape that it is. So we actually need to find it. So on the left side of our screen, we have different generators, we have filters, we have different functions, all of this stuff. But I need to find a specific pattern. So I can look under here. What I'm going to do is actually type in the search bar right here and type in pattern. You notice you get stuff for things like bricks, brick generator, checkerboard pattern. You get mesh, you get splatter, all this cool stuff, weaves. So it's a nice start. But the one that we're going to be looking for and using is called Mesh 1. So if you type in the word pattern into our search bar, into our library, you'll find one called Mesh 1. Yeah. And it looks kind of like this, you know, cross pattern here. So we're just going to drag this node into our graph. So once we drag it in there, now we can actually make adjustments to it in our scene. So what we're going to be doing is changing the amount of tiling first. So right now I want to change it to maybe tile 8 times, let's say. And you can just drag it left and right to tile it more or less. So 8's probably pretty good. But I know this pattern is not how I want it to be. I need it to be rotated. So there's not a rotate icon for it. There is a rotate button or a kind of a binary true-false value for rotate 45 degrees. So right now it's set to false. Click on it to create it as true. So that's how we kind of start with the node for it. But let's say first what we're going to be doing is, I don't need to change the uniform color at the moment. What I am going to be doing is changing the normal for it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first make an adjustment to this. Right now, the edges are a little soft. I want this to actually be nice and sharp and crisp. So what kind of node would I use? I want to take it. I can use the levels. I think they do have a sharpen. Yeah, they do have sharpen, but I'm gonna get a lot more control with my levels adjustment. But that is a good start. So let me create a levels adjustment here. I'm gonna plug it in like I did before, and now kind of adjust the black and white values. Make this a bit sharper. I'm just gonna crunch the whenever I say crunch the levels, I mean selecting the top black and white inputs and then kind of moving them closer together. Like this. Yeah. Let's see. You want to try to keep it somewhat in the center, because if you go too far one direction, you'll miss out on some of this nice edge that's happening here. So something along the lines of this is a little bit better. You can kind of see the difference if you double click from one to the other. So you can actually change your 2D view based on which node you have selected. Cool. So now what do we do? That's not very useful. It's like a height map, but it's not a normal map, right? Guess what? We can convert a height to a normal map using another node.
Oh, right. Here comes the spaghetti.
Oh, yeah. Get ready. It is not in your default node, so you actually have to search for it. So what you want to type in is, let's say, yeah. If you type in the word height, yeah. Yes, it's the, if you type in the word height, it's on the second row. I believe it's this one. Yes. So let's see, make sure. There we go. So it's height to normal world units. Yeah. That's a blender. So this is height to normal world units. It's half checkerboard, half normal map. So once you do that, now let's go ahead and just get rid of this other normal map for now. And we're just going to plug this directly into our normals and watch what happens. It did the thing. Neat. So yours should look like something like this for now. Okay. So it works kind of like, you know, you have a normal node and then you make an adjustment to it, and then you can blend other stuff together. So let's look at how to blend stuff. So I want to create a rust. I want to create rust on my corrugated metal, whatever it is. So what I might do is create a grunge node. I'm going to type in the word grunge. Make sure I spell it right. Grunge. All right. I'm just going to stick to grunge map 01. And I'm going to drag it in. Okay. Now, what do we know about Rust? Rust is the oxidation of any sort of metallic surface, usually created by, let's say, rain or erosion. So therefore, it's kind of dripping, right? So if I want to make it look like it's dripping, I can add in this case, a directional warp. I want to make this normal grunge look like it's actually dripping up and down.
Is that the first one?
Yeah, it's the Grunge Map 001. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to right-click, add a node for a directional blur. So if I plug in my map here, right now it's going the opposite way of what I want. I actually want it to go 90 degrees the other way. So as you move it over, you notice that it is rotating your grunge map. If you want to get more precise with it, you can actually double click on the number here and just type in 90 degrees, hit enter. You can change the overall amount of intensity as well. So find a nice happy medium. The default is fine. I think it's defaulted to like 9 or 10. That should be okay. But I need this to actually look like a rust color, right?
Plug it into your color node?
Not quite. So what I want to tell the computer is that any of the lower values, any of the darker values, I want to be transform that into another color. Any of the brighter values, transform that into another color. So they have a function in Photoshop that I don't know if I showed you guys. It's called gradient map. So it's a similar principle. I'm taking the brightness values of one image and changing the colors of it. Let me just show you. If I right click, add a node for a gradient map. If I plug in this gradient map in here, right now my gradient is set to black and white. Same as my image, same as my grunge map. I want to change that to actually use a color. So I'm going to go in my gradient editor on that node. Once I've plugged in my directional blur into my gradient map, looking at my gradient down here, and gradient editor. So notice that you now have actual color fill layer. Let's remove this actually. Whoops. No. Clear all. All right. So if you just kind of click on the end of it, you should be able to adjust this color here. So right now, I am just kind of moving around my colors, selecting these points here, and adjusting my color overall. Actually, it's the opposite way, right? Nope. That was wrong. So I want to try to find something, a happy medium. So something along the lines of this, possibly. Here we go. Maybe desaturate it a little bit. Maybe make it darker. Maybe make this darker. There we go. So, yep. I'll just leave this up for right now and come help you guys out. So if you've accidentally created a third point in your gradient, just hit clear all and just click on the end of it. Click on the... If you accidentally created multiple points in your gradient map, just hit the clear all icon up here. And it restores the grayscale image. So you want to go for kind of a darker brownish color to a brighter orange. That should give you kind of what you need. And you can use different grunge maps, play around with more points. Okay, so just to see what this kind of looks like, let's X out of this. So where do we connect? Right, because if I just plug this straight in, it'll just change everything to that color, right? I don't want to do that. I want to blend these two together. So what I'm going to do is right-click, add a node to blend. So you notice you have your foreground color and your background color. So if I select my foreground to be this, my gray metal color, background to be this. Let me delete it out of there. And try to plug it in, it's not going to do anything. Yeah, sorry. Let me go back and show you what I did. So I'm just getting rid of my connection to uniform color. So I actually need to say, okay, well, I need to blend these two together into something. So I'm going to right-click, add a node to blend. Okay. Right now it's asking for 3 different things: foreground, background, and overall opacity. So let me just check and make sure that this works before I tell you guys the wrong thing and ruin you. Alright, there we go. Alright, good. Good. Okay, so what it requires is foreground color and background color, and then opacity to control between those two blended areas. So what I can do is select my metal, connect it to my foreground color, or foreground blend. Select my gradient map, connect to my background. And for opacity, I could create another grunge map to help control that. I could just select this grunge map 001 here and connect it to opacity. And then connect that to my base color. And now, if you notice, it is actually affecting it, or affecting the color at least. Okay, so you done goofed. So I'll come take a look at it in a second. So after break, I went ahead further and finished up the rest of the nodes for my roughness and my metallic, as well as adjusted my base color. Instead of using this grunge map from before, I actually created it based on the inputs that I was using for my curvature and adjusted with levels, blended stuff together. I'm going to walk you guys through how I did this. What's up? Okay. Do you guys mind if I turn off the lights? Okay.
Don't mind at all. I have a drink in my system.
There we go. So, is that better? Okay. So, to kind of walk through what I did, I'm going to give an overview first, and then we'll go step by step. So, I deleted all those extra nodes that I created for the kind of demonstration, the metallic and roughness. So as before, I created my grunge map. In this case, I did a directional blur. What I may want to do is a directional warp. It depends, but the directional blur is fine for the actual rust. And then I created the gradient map based off of that, changing those extreme values to more of an orange hue, and then blended them together. But I had to set the opacity from somewhere, which we'll get to, and plugged into my base color. The mesh is how I created that corrugated pattern, adjusted it with levels, and then converted height to normals, and then added it to my normal blend here. Now, looking at this normal map, I can use that information from the normal map to define, let's say I want to find the edges along the tops and along the outer portions of this actual corrugated metal. Find those edges. So remember a curvature map, right? Kinda. Okay. Give you an idea, this is what a curvature map looks like. It is a grayscale map that is defined, that's kind of your smooth surface, but any edges will be highlighted in white. So that's what these are. These kind of very extreme edges in direction, or extreme changes in direction, are highlighted in white. So using that, I had the intention of using this to find the edges so that I can have rust along my edges, as if it were occurring naturally. So otherwise, my rust would just be haphazardly all over the thing. I want this to look realistic, and I want it to act realistically. Ow. So what I'm going to do is do a levels adjustment on that to use that as sort of an alpha mask that I can blend together with another grunge map, or in this case it's called black and white spots. So again, I'm only trying to find the edges along here and use that as black and white information for the edges. I then created, it's called a BW spot, or BNW spots, to create just another type of grunge map. In this case, I did not do a directional blur, but I did a directional warp. It does not blur the image, it simply distorts it in a direction that you want. It requires 2 inputs, however you can just use the same thing for both. I used a blend node to connect that levels with that directional warp, but by default, it looked like this. It wasn't actually pulling in the alpha information, or wasn't using the proper blending mode. So one thing I need to make sure is that whenever I am using a blend node, I have to actually assign an actual blending option. And notice that it's much like Photoshop. You have options for adding, or linear dodge, subtracting, multiplying, so overlaying, so forth and so on. In this case, I'm going to add as a linear dodge. And what that looks like now is if I double click on it, it's now added those white edges from my curvature with the levels adjusted on top of this other directional warped map, which I then did another levels adjustment to crunch it a bit more, so that again I get a black and white information from this mask. In order for this to work as, let's say, a metallic map, let's say, right now it's doing the wrong thing. Or if I just try to actually plug this in, let me show you what it's going to do. It's inverting the wrong, it's setting metallic for the wrong surface. So sometimes I'll need to actually invert a node. So let me undo. There we go. So at some points, I will actually need to invert the grayscale in a separate node. So if I type in invert, you can actually invert or invert grayscale. Either one should work. I just did a invert grayscale over this image, which I then plugged into my metallic. And that gives me that information for metallic and non-metallics, for my rust and for my shiny metal. I can then use this map to plug in for my rust up here, because this area is already defined with those edges here for my rust. So I can just use that output, plug it into my opacity of my original blend for my color, and it properly affects it. And notice if I look really, really close, I am affecting those edges.
Do edges rust like that?
The what?
Do edges actually rust like that?
They could. If you want to really, really study and get it super accurate, then yes, you should probably, study material and look at actual photographs of things and try to replicate that using your graph. Now, to create my metallic, I didn't want to just simply use this and call it a day. I can actually blend it in with another grunge map. So I can type in another grunge map for my roughness. And I grabbed, this case was grunge map 12 for kind of generic scratches along the surface. I did a levels adjustment because roughness is again defined in a full black and white grayscale value. I want more areas to be rough. I don't want it to be 100% black and white. I want variation to it. So I made some further adjustments in my luminance and then blended together this original levels into a blend node that I then set the blending mode to add or linear dodge, and then plugged into my roughness channel here. Otherwise it looks something like this with no roughness on anything. Ridiculously shiny. This is what the roughness will ended up making it look like. So now we have those nice just kind of scratches along the surface and displaying a nice highlighted metal underneath. Alright, so with that being said, I'm going to delete all that, try to make it from scratch with you guys. So, first thing you want to do is get rid of that connection here for your original color blend node. We're not going to use that. We're going to create our own. So get rid of, yours should look somewhat like mine, so get rid of your roughness and metallic information as well. It should, your cube should, excuse me, look something like this. The what? Get rid of that opacity. Yeah. Because we'll be generating it on our own in a little bit. So yours should look something like this.
Just the normal and the color?
Just the normal and the color for right now. Because we're going to use the normal information to determine a whole bunch of other stuff. Yep, so if you need to, again, just to kind of run through the other maps, having a grunge map, putting in this case, I might actually change this to directional warp and see what happens. I'll leave it as a blur, that's fine. Everything's fine. Adjusting that with a gradient map. Blending it in with a uniform color. Uniform color is in the foreground, gradient map is in the background, and then plugged into the base color. To create my normal map, mesh 1, created with, mesh 1 is the name of the pattern. Adjusted it with the levels adjustment to kind of crunch in the levels, make it less soft. Converted to a normal map using a height to normal world units, and then plugged directly into my normal map. get to this. All right. Ready or not, here we go. So, what we need to create first is curvature. So we need to find the edges of this normal map. So I'm going to type in my search bar, curvature, and it should be the first one, curvature. So description creates a curvature map from a normal map. So if we double click on that, or actually, sorry, click and drag, I forgot. So we have a curvature map, but we need to plug in our normal map into it to actually give it information. So it should look something like this. Yeah. So next, what would we need to add to kind of make color adjustments to this? Levels. Or change the overall levels. I just want those edges. I don't want any of the grayscale values. So I'm going to use the levels to control that. So I'm going to create a levels, connect it, and then crunch. So something like so. So at the top you crunch your levels, the top controllers here. So again, trying to get black and white, just trying to find the edges along my pattern. Okay. So next thing I'm going to do, actually, real quick, make sure everybody's good. Okay. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create another node. I'm going to bring in another kind of grungy kind of map that I'm going to help blend these two together with. So in this case, I'm going to search for BNW for black and white spots. BNW. And I noticed I have a lot of black and white spots here to choose from. So the first one should be fine. BNW spots 1. And drag that guy in. So this one should be what it looks like. Yeah, B and W spots 1. That should be fine. So, with that, I need to add what's called a directional warp. Because this is kind of more of like that rust. So I'm going to go ahead and create a directional warp to connect this to it in both inputs, in both the input and the intensity input. And again, I'm going to rotate this in 90 degrees. There we go. It's just to make it look a little bit more kind of like it's overall rain, that rain effect. So let's blend them together with what? Blend node. Let's right click, blend them together. I'm going to add this one converted from the curvature to the foreground. And I'm going to add the directional warp one to the background. If I double click on it, nothing happens. Pack it up, folks. We're done. No. The way to fix this is think about blending modes. I'm trying to... This is a lighter value on top of my background. Therefore, I need to add it on top. So kind of like in Photoshop, if you have a lighter layer on top of a darker one, you want to add that that result over our background. So changing the blending mode on the top, right now it's set to copy. Go ahead and say add or linear dodge, and it should change to something like this. So on our blending mode, add or linear dodge. Alright, so now a good spot to further adjust this with a levels adjustment, because if I'm going to use this as my metallic, it has a lot of grayscale value in it. Grayscale on a metalness map is usually a no-no. So what you want to do is define it as black and white. So guess what? Another levels adjustment to crush the levels.
So can the curvature into levels and blend into other levels?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry. I know.
There's a lot of levels.
I just wanted to make sure that like we're feeding this through itself over and over again.
We are. It's an Ouroboros. It's just eating the tail of it. But we're going to go ahead and make adjustments to it to make it pretty much a pure black and white map. So something like this should work fine. Some crunch. Okay, so now we've crunched our levels. We can do stuff with this now. Now we can actually plug this into our metallic straight on if we want to. I think. And let's just see what it looks like. It made the wrong thing metal. So, guess what we got to do? Invert. So we create an invert node, or you can create invert grayscale. I'm going to use grayscale because it's, you know, black and white. We can plug in our map into our invert grayscale node, then use that as part of our metallic map. It's very, very shiny.
Slightly dusty.
Nice.
Yeah. But those little lighter spots that are non-metal, guess what? That's our rust. So guess what we can use this as? More specifically, opacity, and our blend node at the very top.
Yeah.
So we grab this output and put it into our color map here, and there we go. We have our rust. Yep. So again, the roughness will actually, we can do this. Yeah. But before I jump over to roughness,
Where did you plug all this junk that we made into to make it turn into the rust?
so the inverted levels that we did, that crunched levels, we inverted it.
Yes.
We plug that into the opacity of this blend node, the color blend node,
Gotcha.
at the very top.
There we go. There it is.
And there it is. That acts as a mask for our color blend node. Okay. Now, someone asked me, how do we create the roughness? You could try to plug this in by itself. It's not going to look great. It's got no kind of character to it, right? It's just, that is way too perfect. So, remember, our roughness needs to actually have, you know, a little bit of actual roughness, grayscale value. So, In this case, I'm going to do more blending, but I'm going to, you know, this is like some Inception stuff. It's like blend within the levels, then the blend. Anyway. So what I'm going to do is a similar process that I did with the overall metalness. I'm going to create another grunge map here. And I'm going to choose this very bright one, grunge map 12. Should be near the very bottom, this very lighter one here. Should look something like this. So it's got a lot of cool scratches in it that I can use. But right now it's a pure black and white. I want to be a little bit more gray. So guess what I'm using? Levels. Levels. So I'm going to right click. Create another levels adjustment. Plug it in. And this time I will use the white output or white input. It's the bottom right gamma. There you go. Thank you. Terminology. So I'm going to use that and make it a little bit more gray. Actually, the middle one's gamma up here. Don't lie to me. That's gamma. Okay. So you should have grunge map 12. So make sure to add grunge map 12 to your. Oh, so there. I would put it underneath.
Oh, that looks cool.
I can't tell how cool it looks.
Well, we're not done yet. So don't connect it just yet. I just want to see the cool thing. I want to see the cool thing. Yes, I know. So what we're going to do is now blend this black and white map from up here, our levels adjustment, before we inverted it, this one here, into another blend node with this guy. So I'm going to right click, add a node, another blend node. Ignore the opacity. What we're going to do is connect this guy to the output. Our levels is going to be the background. Okay, so another blend node here, connecting that black and white map that we created before we inverted it. We're connecting to the foreground of that blend node for metalness. And we're connecting in the background this kind of grayscale grunge map 12 that we used. And again, to actually see it affecting our surface, we need to change the overall blending mode. In this case, to add in linear dodge. Actually, I think that is incorrect. Let me double check and make sure. Oh, we'll get something. Okay. And then we connect to our roughness and prey. Oh, cool. It did work.
So which, it is linear dodge?
Linear add, yeah. Add linear dodge, yeah. Yes, we did do the thing. Well, we're not quite done with the thing, but we're almost there.
Chill.
I just have a like fully rusted metal.
No, this is just copper now.
There we go.
Donald's looks all cool.
So, we're going to create a new node. And this time we're going to type in normals. And we're looking for normals to height. So, if you type in the word normal, you should see one that's left side normal map, right side checkerboard, normal to height. Don't worry about that one.
Normal to height.
Normal to height. Guess what we plug into it? The normal map. The one over here. The one up here, we're going to plug in our normal down into our height.
So if we have a normal map, why do we need a height map?
A height map is going to be used like for the tessellation, like I mentioned before, to actually push and extrude it outward. So if you wanted to get further, like actual tessellation on each of these little corrugated metal pattern, this is what it would be used for. Now, in this case, it is kind of a weird grayscale value, so I might actually want to do, guess what, another levels adjustment.
My thingy got deleted. Thank goodness for stuff. Who doesn't love
Obviously.
So we can use this now to plug in into our actual height map or height output. Unfortunately, I think something broke. So my 3D view is no longer visible.
Oh. That's fun.
Well,
Oh.
yep. If that happens, believe we need to save our scene. And then I'm going to close and reopen.
And then hi, and you're watching it.
All right, so my 3D view is broken, and this may happen to you. I'm currently working for a solution, but on paper, this is what you would have to do to finish this. We're going to add a node. We would connect this to our height, this converted normal to height from our normal map, converted to this node, normal to height, further adjusted with a levels adjustment, and then connected to our height output. Okay. Now to actually get ambient occlusion, we're going to use that height map that we just created, or that levels adjusted height map, but we're going to search for ambient occlusion, and it should be the first result. Ambient occlusion, and we're going to drop this in here, and look that it requires a height map. So we're going to plug in our height map to this ambient occlusion node, and then drop it in here. And that should be our ambient occlusion. Now, if you feel like that's inaccurate, we can make further adjustments, like we can try to blur it or mask out certain areas. But actually, I think I will do that. So I'm going to make another blend node. Let's do this. Blur. Turn down the intensity on it very slightly. Nope. Nope, that wasn't it. All right. Here's our ambient occlusion. Not 100% accurate, but for this demonstration it is.
100% accurate.
So, as kind of a last step to export our texture maps, we'll go to right-click our graph, our rusted metal demo, in this case. Export outputs at bitmaps. So right here. So if you right-click on the rusted metal, the graph of it in our viewer, export outputs as bitmaps. Click on that. Brings up here, and then you can change the type of format that you want to save your images as, change where you want to save it to, and identify which outputs you want. And again, right-clicking on the graph itself, export outputs as bitmaps. It has to be on this, Blaze. Look. Not this. It's on this. The actual graph right here.
You want to save it as a PNG or a zip?
You want to save it as Targas.
I don't have an AO.
If you don't have an AO, then you did not create the output for it. So again, to create an output, Blaze,
Yeah.
look up here. Right-click, add node,
Okay.
output. If it already exists in here, Blaze, then you need to designate it as an ambient occlusion. So click on this node, or click on the node that you have created, and then look up here real quick. It's under its usage. You need to actually add an item and then set it as ambient occlusion from a drop-down menu.
Sorry about that.
No, it's cool.
I saved it to my exercise folder in the assets and the textures.
So I'm going to export mine out as Targa files. True Vision Targa. Substance Designer. Graph Identifier is the name of it. And I will save all.
And so we plugged the levels adjustment from normal to height into the height map.
The level, for the what?
We plugged the levels adjustment from the like where we went like normal to height,
Yes.
levels, ambient occlusion. We plugged the levels adjustment into height,
Yes.
and then we plugged the ambient occlusion
Into
adjustment of that into AO.
Yes.
Okay, I did that.
Mine's not displaying properly, so yeah, mine's not the best
It's not-
result.
well, mine's not either because it still looks like the normal map is still flat. It's not actually being projected.
Yeah.
It's just being a fake projector.
Now, sometimes the 3D view is just screwed up, and I have fixed it before, but I honestly forgot the solution to fix it, so I'd have to look at that and try to find that for you guys. But if yours looks fine, then we can check out those texture maps that we have created. So I actually have, in this case, rusted metal.
How much technology like this do you think was used when making the first Dead Space game, where like everything is repeating industrial patterns?
Not too sure. Oh, it didn't save out everything? That's not good. Well, it seems like it didn't save out everything. Wonderful. In theory, this should work. Okay, so that's the Substance Designer demo. To give you an idea of what some other graphs might look like,
It's overwhelming when you look at a finished one, but when you build it yourself, it's fairly simple.
yeah. So something like a brick pattern here is pretty, for the most part, straightforward in just using various grunges, initial nodes for actually a brick generator. How about that? With varying things for the slope, offset of those bricks, blurring, sharpening them, changing the overall height difference between it. But I can change, the beauty of this is I can change all this stuff on the fly, and it's non-destructive. Again, I can always go back and fix an original node pretty easily as I'm working. So if I want to change the bricks, usually it's the,
So cool.
I can change the overall variation of them. I can change, let's see. In this case, it's a uniform color that I was trying to blend over. It didn't quite work. But yes, this is primarily for tiling textures, tiling infinitely. And you can make it so that it repeats and has variations in its pattern infinitely, so it's not just stuck to whatever texture map that you export out here. You can actually import an entire substance into Unreal. So I can export out the SBSAR file and use that in Unreal. I've never done it yet, but it is possible. And having separate parameters that you can then adjust directly in Unreal rather than having to go back into Substance and fix a problem in there. Yeah. And again, going back to our rusted metal, hey, it fixed itself, kind of. Kind of. I'll
Side and see if it's actually projecting the. It's not.
the what?
The height map still working.
So the height map is as part of your display properties for your material. Okay, so in our display or scene, nope.
Because something messed up on mine earlier on. Mine looks like somebody just took a high powered blowtorch to it. Kind of burned it rather than it rusted.
So in our material components, edit, there we go. I believe it is based on the height scale. There we go. That's how you actually adjust your scale. So under your 3D view materials, default, edit, the material height, you can adjust the overall scale of it. Now right now it's set it as, let's see.
Oh wait.
It's not great looking because it is using the parallax occlusion. If we set it to tessellation, so if you go to our materials, definitions, physically metallic roughness by default, set it instead of parallax occlusion, set it to tessellation. It should give you a better result. And then by changing the material default edit options, you can change how much that is scaling up our tessellation scale. So now we actually get height information from this. It's under materials, default, definitions, physically metallic roughness, and then change it to, instead of parallax occlusion, to tessellation. That's if you want to, this is only if you want to display height information as you're working. So again, this is what I was talking about earlier. This is the benefit of that. It creates fake 3D geometry that's pushed out based on your height map. It messed your stuff up? So, one more thing. If you want, you must, I highly suggest, and if you are going to hand this off to someone else to work on, you want to keep things organized, right? Remember how I showed in Unreal how you can make those comments and those little windows, put stuff within it? You can do the same thing in here. So if I right click, I can create, in this case it is called a frame. Adding a frame allows me to put all that stuff within that frame. Right click it, I will rename it. I want to rename it. Let me rename it. Title, I'll call this color. And move that stuff around.
Don't just have a spaghetti mess.
So it's not spaghetti nonsense, yes. I can create a new frame. If I have multiple nodes selected, it'll automatically create it around those nodes. Call this normal, bornal. There we go. And change the scale of it if I need to, and move it around.
How do you change the name again?
It's in the property of it under the title. And so this is the I'm actually going to move this around. I'll just name them both together. It's fine. There we go. Nice and organized. So I know exactly where stuff is if I ever need to come back to the scene, and I'm not confused about where to go. Eyeballs. Yes. So you can get a lot of use out of this, especially for larger terrains, any sort of areas that need a tile infinitely. So it's very useful for stuff like I have here for my brick patterns that I don't want to have sections and like pieces that I'm going to snap together. I can just make one long thing with the UVs repeated forever and create my brick patterns on my floor and my walls. I generated that using Substance Designer. So it's very useful for those situations. Now, it can be a lot more complex. So I would say if you want to further look into both Substance Painter and Designer, the actual YouTube channel for Substance has some really, really good tutorials on some beginner intro level tutorials on their own channel. So Allegorithmic is the name of the company who has created the Substance Suite. And if you look in their playlists, they have Substance Painter 2017 getting started, Substance Designer getting started, and look, it's that corrugated metal that I showed you guys. Wow, it's like I ripped their tutorial for some reason. But for a reason, because it goes over a lot of different things. They also have one that's specifically for creating like a brick pattern as well. Ready to use, and it's also available whenever you launch Substance Designer. I believe it takes you directly here. So this is what I would suggest if you want to, honestly, if you want to get further into Substance Designer. My knowledge is pretty limited in the fact that I don't work in it that much. So at some points I will and have gotten stuck on certain steps. Painter I'm much more familiar with, and I actually like Painter a lot more. But you can't really create a tiling pattern in Painter unless you do some specific steps of baking down to like a flat plane and then using that as a texture to tile infinitely. So using a combination of ZBrush and other things. But definitely Designer's very powerful tool in creating those texture maps that we need for our stuff in our game engine and anything else really. Just to give you an idea of what some people can do in the software, some professional work. Some really, really cool looking stuff. It's all created procedurally.
And then it makes you want to cry too.
Makes you want to cry because it is fantastic. There we go. Here's some Uncharted. There we go.
Maybe if we do it more, it'll be easier. But right now, it's just like this.
You can do some crazy stuff like this.
Go back up to that one. No, down.
This one. Now this is using specifically like you can import your own maps, like your black and white maps, and like put it on here if you need. But stuff like tiles, cracked tiles, all of this stuff is done procedurally using Substance Designer. So many bullet holes. There you go.
Somebody had fun, I guess.
Yep. Again, you know, procedurally created stone wall with actual extruded out height map, or displacement map, I should say. You can make something like a leather substance, like a couch. And notice how it is a repeated pattern, therefore it's applying it to any sort of surface that you apply that material to, as long as the UVs are right.
Oh my
And
God.
yeah.
Nope.
So you can see how they separated out their leather from the main forms to creases, finer details to even dust that's over it.
This makes me want to die, dog.
But it's so cool.
It's
dying allowed.
cool,
Yeah, looking
but
at.
it scares me. And I feel like I'd get a headache just from this.
Oh yeah. Oh, is that Matthew Taylor? Okay, cool. Yeah.
People who have the patience for this.
Steve Holt. Cool. So that's kind of the power of Substance Designer. Now, before there was Substance Painter, there was Substance Designer, and people would actually do their. Some people, crazy people, would do their textures in Designer completely. I don't know why you would do that, but you know, people do their thing.
Each their own.
You can do your like based on curvature and do a bunch of nodes. Painter's much more user friendly, I would say. But again, a lot of cool stuff in there.
Really cool.
That kind of concludes our look at Substance Designer. So I want you guys working on your projects at this point. So you have previously gotten approval on, or should have gotten approval on your concepts. So we should be gray boxing our scene at the moment and trying to bring it into Unreal as early as possible. So much like I did here, I took in my gray box scene and I actually applied some generic materials to it just to see how it would look with my lighting. I kind of took it a step further, and I'm actually bringing in more finalized assets and placing them where I need it to go. But this is how my there we go. This is how my stuff would look once it finishes lighting the scene. There we go. So this is another example of my generic gray box geometry, but with a single color map inside of it. Whoop, wrong button. I hate this lighting thing that it does. But I just was adding lights in to try to control the overall mood of the scene. Now, this is a little too bright, so I could lower my lights or see how it looks like with my actual geometry and textures in it. So gray box group, there we go. A little bit better, but again, I'd still want to control lighting a little bit more. But I'm worried about overall scale and placement more so than anything. Making sure that it feels right to traverse in. All right. So, I'm going to stop talking to try to save my voice for the rest of the afternoon. And meanwhile, you guys will work. Sounds good?